Carolyn Dube here. What's the play for today? Well, today I am going to do some things with precision. I'm going to make this rainbow rain card that was inspired by the quote, "Life isn't about waiting for the storm to pass, it's about learning to dance in the rain." And notice how precisely it's all lined up? Do you think I measured it? No, I totally cheated. I let a stencil do all the hard work for me so that it looks like I lined stuff up, but I certainly didn't actually take any time to do that. Now this rain stencil, this 4x4 stencil, is a part of this month's Stencil Club that I'm honored to be the guest designer for. And you can find out all sorts of information about Stencil Club over at Stencil Girl Products. This card started with the quote. Now, I printed it out on cardstock and I did it on my printer because I didn't want to have to deal with handwriting it because I'm not a huge fan of my own handwriting when you actually try and read my handwriting. So I'm going to show you how I cheat and turn this into the perfect size for a card. I've got the card base folded there, and I'm just centering it above the words where I want it, tracing the sides, and then I'm going to kind of decide how much space I want at the bottom for it. And as I move it down about where I think I want it, see how I'm checking the depth of it, if it's centered where I want it from the bottom of the card. And that's about the depth that I want on it. So I'm going to put a little mark there. And what that's going to tell me is how far to slide down the card. Once I've got that done, then I'm simply going to draw light pencil lines on the top and the bottom. And now I know what size to cut this out with. I'm going to cut this out on a paper trimmer, that way it's all nice and straight, and I'm going to cut off the pencil lines. I don't want to see any of the pencil lines, and when I'm done, what I will have is a piece almost exactly the size of my card. Now this isn't exactly the same size, like engineer perfect level. I'm going to share with you how I fix that at the end of the video. Well, now it's time to get my dancer on here. I've got the stencil on here called Learning to Dance, and I'm just using some black acrylic paint here with a cosmetic sponge, and I am going to stencil this guy in here. I love that his arms are up in the air. It kind of epitomizes the dancing to me, just kind of a whimsical, fun character. Well, now that I've got him stenciled on here, now I need to get ready to bring in the colorful rain. I'm going to be using cosmetic sponges, but I am cutting these down. What I need to do is just have a small sponge that I'm working with. And where do I get these? Well, when I'm using a larger cosmetic sponge, like when they're brand new, and the paint's dried on it, I just cut it off and keep saving those little remnants until it gets smaller and smaller. And that's what you're seeing here is I'm cutting up some of these smaller ones because I want to have a lot of control over where this goes, because I don't want to have to spend time masking anything off. Well, now I'm dipping that cosmetic sponge into some acrylic paint. I'm happening to be using a heavy body paint. That way it's basically thicker paint so that it won't run underneath my stencil as easily. It means I don't have to be quite as careful about what I'm doing. And I'm going to put my stencil on there, and I am just going to lightly pounce up and down to make green rain here. And I'm actually going to make everything line up on this card, but I'm not going to measure anything. I'm going to let the stencil do all the hard work and the heavy lifting for me. Because I like the look of things lined up sometimes, but I sure don't want to have to take the time to line it up or measure it. So there's my first set of rain, and I want the rain to go all the way down to the bottom. So to get that to line up, what I'm going to do is just go up to the last raindrops, line the stencil up on that, and then stencil down the rest of the way. And because my fun little dancer guy is in black, I can see that paint and I just don't stencil over that. That's what I meant by I wanted cosmetic sponges that were small and I could have a lot of control over, so it was really easy to see where the paint was going. I'm also using a small amount of paint, a light amount of paint, so to speak, so that it dries fairly quickly. So as I'm doing this, I'm not having to worry about things smearing. Well, now it's time for the next color, and I'm going to let the stencil do the heavy lifting for me of lining things up. So you can see how I'm using the last row of green to line up the stencil, and now I'm going to stencil over 2 of the rows with blue. Now you're saying, wait, 2? There were 3 of the green. Never fear, that 3rd row of blue will be showing up again. Now what am I going to do about his hands? Am I going to put raindrops over them and around them, or how am I going to deal with that? Now this was a very difficult decision for me. I labored over it and I finally decided, you know what? Let it rain, put some color around him. So I'm taking that cosmetic sponge and just trying to work around the black as best I can. But by the way, if I get a bunch of color on top of the black and it shows, what can I do? Then what I can do is just put some black back on top of it, put the stencil on it again to fix anything that I want. Well, now I've got 2 rows of blue, but I wanted 3 rows of blue raindrops. So what am I going to do? I'm going to line that stencil up again, and now I'm going to get my 3rd row of blue. That way I've got 3 rows of the color, and as a hint, I'm going to have 3 rows of each and every color as it goes across this card. I've got my top 3 rows done now, and guess how I'm going to do the bottom 3? I'm going to line it up just like I did last time, only this time I've really only got 1 good solid raindrop to use, but that's going to be okay because I can kind of see where the other one is around his arm. And what I'm going to do now is just put the raindrops around him. This is why having a little cosmetic sponge is so handy, because I can just kind of go up along those edges without having to mask anything off or spend a lot of time prepping anything, because you've probably figured out by now I'm not into waiting for things. I don't want to have to measure things. I just want to get in there and play. When I lift up the stencil, my rain is all going to be lined up and look like I spent a lot of time thinking and planning and making it stay perfectly straight, when really I'm just cheating with the stencil. So now I'm going to bring in a 3rd color, and yep, I've sped up the video because you know how this process works. And how do I get away with putting stencil on top of paint and I'm not getting a lot of smearage and that kind of thing? Well, the reason is because I'm using a small amount of paint. So it's very, very dry, so it dries very quickly, so that keeps any kind of smearing at an absolute minimum. Now, if you have a problem with paint colors mixing or smearing, what I recommend is using dabbing off your cosmetic sponge more so that it's a very dry sponge. And you may find that if there's paint on your stencil, if it's mixing with the other colors, you may want to just take a baby wipe or a paper towel and wipe off your stencil in between colors if you're having any problem with that. As I finished up my rainbow rain, I really like how it looked, and I was on the fence. Do I leave it the way it is or do I put more on it? And you know, it's me. Of course I'm going to put more stuff on it because I love to layer stuff up. I grabbed the glitter paste because I wanted my rain to sparkle. Now, I could go and carefully put little bits on here and there and all that kind of stuff, but again, I'm impatient. So what I am going to do is put the stencil back on it. I've dipped my catalyst blade right into the glitter paste, which is this wonderful iridescent glitter, and they have it in all sorts of colors, but for this one I really wanted the iridescent look. I get little bits of sparkle on it, making it look like I made it all sparkle. But there's a catch with this, and it's a big catch. This stuff does not dry as fast as the paint that I put on there. Now that catch is actually going to work to my advantage right here because I got a little bit of the glitter on my guy, on my dancer guy. So I'm just going to take a Q-tip and wipe it up because it's still wet. I can just do that. It's really easy to clean him up, so I didn't have to be nearly as precise because frankly, when using a catalyst blade, I'm not as precise with a stencil as when I'm using a small cosmetic sponge. That makes sense. But I'm going to end up getting glitter on the back side of the stencil, so I'm taking a baby wipe or a paper towel and I'm wiping off any place that there might be glitter on the back of it from where it touched wet glitter. And see, as I go to line this up, you can see how the very edge of it on the far right is going to touch wet glitter that's down there, which means it's going to pick up some of the glitter that's there. And I don't want to transfer that around to places where I don't want it. So that's why I'm going to have to take a moment and wipe off the stencil on those areas each time I use it. Now I'm just wiping off the back side. The front I don't care about because it's not going to smear it anywhere that I don't want. But it's the back that I have to kind of watch and pay attention to if I'm going to touch it onto any area that has some wet glitter, that it's going to transfer somewhere where I didn't want it. Now you might be thinking that I could take out a heat gun and use that to dry it in between, and that way glitter transferring to the back of the stencil or smearing or that kind of thing wouldn't be an issue. And if you were thinking that, you are absolutely correct. There's one catch for me though. That somehow seems like waiting forever, so I tend to avoid using the heat gun and just make it work by being able to fill this whole thing in as I go. Both of the stencils that I'm using in this card are available from Stencil Girl products. The Dancer guy, he's from the Learning to Dance stencil that's in their regular line. And the raindrops here, they're a part of the Stencil Club offering for this month. I'm the guest designer for this month's set, and you can find out all about it over at Stencil Girl products. So you might be wondering how I can be so loose and free with this when I'm basically going into wet stuff. I'm not even lining stuff up very, very carefully at this point. Well, that's because the glitter is very, very clear. It's got that iridescent shimmer, so it really reacts well to colors underneath it. But if it's on just straight white, it doesn't stand out as being horribly misaligned. If I was doing this with black paint, every little thing would show. But because this is an iridescent glitter sparkle thing, it doesn't show. So on that one, notice how I did that with a lot more. It's kind of sloppy and messy. Even if I come back and do this with it, it really doesn't show a whole lot. It's very, very forgiving, which is why I can get away with this by not waiting for each layer to dry carefully. Although that is one really big blob of it that I've got there. So what am I going to do with that big blob? I'm just going to bring in that handy dandy Q-tip and wipe it up. When this is completely dry, the only people that will know that this happened are you and me. Then the last step is to attach it onto the card blank, but there's a little secret if you want everything to look like it was all perfectly sized together. All right, so now how do you make the card look like it was perfectly fit to the actual card blank that you have? Well, the way you do that is you take the piece that you've made, the decorative piece, and you line it up right along the fold. It's really important that the fold side is lined up. Everything else you can cut and trim, but the fold side, yeah, as soon as you cut that, it's no longer a card, it's suddenly a postcard. So when I get this lined up, then what I do is come back and just trim the other three sides so it looks like everything was perfectly made for each other, like I'd done some kind of serious engineering level of measuring and cutting and executing on that, when I'm not that kind of person. I like to skip the whole measuring part and just trim stuff up afterwards. Well, thanks so much for joining me for this play today. If you've enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. And if you think you know somebody that would enjoy a little bit of play in their day, I'd really appreciate it if you shared this video with them. Thanks so much for letting me be a part of your colorful journey.